So good morning, Mr. Baker. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Of course.
So, we are just doing this, and we are just trying to understand how today, in today's LHS, it's impacting, the current infrastructure is impacting the education today. So, from
Okay.
your perspective as a principal, how would you describe what it feels like to learn and work in the current LHS building on a typical day?
Um, if I was using a single adjective, it would probably be um, overcrowded. Our hallways feel very, very crowded during passing times. Our cafeterias feel very crowded during lunch. In the outer buildings, our smaller classrooms feel very crowded in terms of having 25 or 26 students in a 600 to 700 square foot room. So I think the biggest adjective would be, for me would be cramped or crowded or feeling a little bit claustrophobic. The other part of that is you know it's also just such a large student body. And we have students from, the ages of 14 right through 19 in some cases. And being in such a cramped and crowded space, as you're transitioning from middle school and our four separate buildings, I think it can sometimes make it feel like the place is a little more hectic and scarier and harder to transition to for students. So that's probably the adjective I would use.
Yeah, that's a
Big,
lot, actually.
big and
Yeah,
crowded. Yeah.
big and crowded. I got it. So, as you said that the crowded spaces, like, right? So, with the crowded spaces, with the temperature swings, with the noise, and with the older infrastructure, it keeps showing up during the school day, right? In particular, how do they connect to student engagement and behavior?
Um, well, I think by and large, our students at Lexington High School are hardworking, thoughtful, and intelligent, and they come to school every day, wanting to learn as much as they can and do well. But yes, they can face some challenges. Temperature is one that you mentioned. We have very old and antiquated systems for heating the building. We have an old steam boiler system that heats the main building and the outer buildings. Most modern schools wouldn't be built that way. And unfortunately, as time ages, these steam boiler systems, at least during the cold weather months, have a more difficult time keeping all of the various rooms at a nice and livable temperature. You can have a situation wherein maybe some rooms on the beginning of the run are a little bit over hot, and then by the end of the heating loop, they're not getting enough heat. And most of our classrooms, about 60% of the space at Lexington High School and almost all of the classrooms, they are not air conditioned. So more and more we're coming to school in months in late May and June, and then again in early August and September that, we're seeing temperatures in the mid to upper 80s or even 90s, and the ambient temperature in classrooms is even higher than that by the middle of the day. So temperature can be a challenge for students anywhere at Lexington High School. That's why they're carrying their jackets around with them and sort of dressing in layers to go to different parts of the school.
Yeah.
In terms of noise, most of the classrooms have what's called a unit ventilation unit, which is separate and apart from the heating system in the school. So this is a fan-based unit that brings fresh air into the room, that exchanges the fresh air that we need to keep the carbon monoxide and the particulate and other things um, out of the room. But it's really not the way that in a modern HVAC system you would bring fresh air into a room. They're very loud, and so they compete with the heating systems as well, the fans and the motors. And so sometimes students have to either speak very loudly in order to hear one another in a classroom. Maybe you're learning a foreign language or you're doing some sort of a project or a presentation. You have to speak very loud to be heard. Or in some cases, students don't do that, and they're missing out on what their peers are saying, what the teacher might be saying, because they're a little bit shy or demure, and they're just not going to speak up to be overheard over those systems. So um,
It
that's my
sounds a
point.
lot on the students, actually. They are just in the summers, they are sweltering, and in winters, they are carrying their heavy jackets. It just takes us back to 1950s when the system was built and when we used to operate. Perhaps we were not even born, but our kids are, experiencing those things today in today's world. We were interviewing yesterday Sarah, who actually graduated from the school. She says there is nothing different. So when she graduated several years back, and now when her children are there in the high school, she just sees no difference. So, it's a lot on our kids to live an experience on the day-to-day basis from the 1950s. So
Outside of the modular classrooms, which were built in the 2010s, and maybe the elevators, which were installed in the 1980s for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Lexington High School that Associate Principal Dan Melia's mother went to is pretty much the same one that kids are going to now. So, yeah.
So, yeah. So it's more of a firefighting time. We always are in a firefighting. The facilities, your departments must be like always in a firefighting zone. Instead of doing preventive measures, they must be doing always a corrective measures and firefighting. So, like, so with this entire setup, like which parts of the academic program do you feel are most constrained by the current facility? Like whether that's science labs, arts, special education, or something else. How do you see that impact up in students' opportunities?
Um, I think that the number one impact is probably in classrooms that are undersized, especially in the outer buildings that were designed in a day and age when teaching was, what they call, stand and deliver, right? Or sometimes it's referred to as sage on the stage. So the teacher was up at the front of the classroom. There was a whiteboard. They were imparting information, and students were sitting in a set of rows, and they were taking notes, right? Then it was their job to review their notes and to come in and to sit for quizzes or tests. Um, and the biggest problem with that in terms of contemporary education is that there's been a movement away from that. There's a more constructivist approach to education, and has been since the mid 1980s forward. That learning is best when there are hands-on components, when there are collaborative components, when students are talking to one another or working with one another. There's kinesthetic elements to the lesson. Kids get up, around, they move, they write, they respond to one another, they move post-its around, they do problems together, they look at each other's work. And a classroom that was built between 600 square feet and 700 square feet simply doesn't allow that. And if you have a class that is mostly junior or senior students, those are young adults. They're big kids, right? And so that fills up a classroom of that size and doesn't really allow for that. So that's a pretty baseline way in which the school that was built largely in the 1950s just doesn't meet the needs of contemporary education. Um, but sure, there are other ways. We have four separate buildings: a math building, a world language building, science building. That's not really the way that we're looking to prepare students, or that even the world beyond Lexington High School thinks now. More and more vocations and avocations require students to integrate knowledge in interdisciplinary ways, and to be able to, explore topics across those areas. Um, and we've also been pretty hemmed in by the fact that some of the more cutting edge types of learning spaces just weren't there 70 years ago. You don't have a place for students are particularly interested in robotics or fabrication or graphic design or many other sort of fields in, yes, in STEM or STEAM that weren't a part of the curricula a long time ago, and which now would be purpose built for students. So there's a lot of different answers to those questions, but for me, the number one is just the basic size of a classroom, and then the other is around a more flexible space that provides students and teachers opportunities to sort of use specialized spaces and specialized equipment.
Now, from this is the impact on students. Like, what is that from the teaching perspective? Like, what you hear and observe, how do the building conditions influence teachers and ability to try new instructional approaches, run labs or projects, or just manage a class effectively? Like, how does that show up in their teaching every day?
Um, well, I think the answer is that we most teachers probably do their best with what they have, but if they, like with anything, if you gave them new and different tools, they would probably use them and they would use them better, right? I think if, for instance, there was a graphics communications lab, I would imagine that our social studies and our English and our art teachers would be using that more often. They might be engaging in a little bit more maybe project-based learning or hands-on kind of messy learning than they can do in their current classrooms. So that might be a way. It's not to say that they don't attempt that type of learning, but maybe it's not um, as great or as efficient as it could be. What other ways? I think that certainly with respect to doing anything that involves group work, that's challenging for teachers. You see a lot of teachers sending kids out to the hallway, or is there an open classroom next door? Really trying to figure out, how can I get a space for kiddos to split up into some teams and to think about a problem together and to work on that problem. And of course, we know that that's a skill that's needed more and more beyond Lexington High School, is the ability to sort of problem solve in a team together. I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. So it sounds like all the teachers, they are just not giving up just because of the aging infrastructure. They make sure that they create their workarounds, or they're adapting to create, learning in a way available in a way that it still benefits the students. But it's just they are going beyond their level of what exists today. Right. So, because most of us, we don't understand and we never realize like what's happening behind the scenes with this aging infrastructure, which is 70 plus, with the crowded space and 700 square feet, which is only designed 700 square feet. And my understanding can only manage 15. And ideally, the state requirement is 825 square feet. So I can just imagine how crammed up that space could be. And if there are spaces and labs are not available, how would that be when teachers are just trying to find out something on the go, like always ad hoc something, right? And making arrangements, making workarounds. So, do you think this like physical environment does it plays a role in teachers' morale or burnout? Like, have you seen what are some of the ways you might have seen over a time period, over a period of time?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think surely that yeah, I think that, morale or whatever else you want to call it, or maybe just nuisance or annoyance, right? And I think, for instance, I don't like it, but these things happen. Those same unit vents that I was talking about, you'll go into a classroom and you'll see that there's a stack of textbooks across the top of it, right? And what are those teachers trying to do? They're trying to quiet that unit, right? Of course, the reason I don't like it is that that's the unit bringing fresh air into the room, and we also need fresh air, right? And so we're fighting between a room that can be heard or a room that has fresh air. So that's when you talk about workarounds, there's not only workarounds in terms of what the teachers do to try and make the academics work, but also just in terms of trying to make the space or the environment work. you know,
Mm.
teachers often come to me with creative ideas also about an in-school field trip or a speaker or bringing somebody into the school. And unfortunately, we don't have any kind of flexible space to hold that at this point or to have that happen, or we're extremely limited. So, you know, teachers will come in my door and they'll knock on it and they'll say, "Hey, X, Y, or Z person is in town. I'd really love to have them come and talk to my students, maybe from all of my classes. Can I get a space where 75 or 80 students can come and listen to this person?" And then we'll go and check. And there's like one space at the school where that can happen, and it's all signed out, right? So you needed to know 8 months ago when the person was going to be around. And so there's a lot of that, and then only 20 students can come, and you got to do it in a classroom, and then there's sort of compromising. The design for the new high school calls for a couple of spaces where we could host larger events or sort of seminars or things during the day. So it hampers some of the creative ideas the students have or the teachers have around what they can do with students.
So it sounds like the teachers are still not dropping off any opportunity for the students to grow, and just that infrastructure is not helping us to create or give them a learning environment which they really, really deserve. And it's a constitutional right for them to learn in a place wherein, in a place in an educational institute where they go. Very, very disappointing, actually, that we have dropped so many opportunities just because of the infrastructural issues, right? Now, these aging systems like heating, plumbing, electrical, right? They must be like whenever they break down, it must be like ruining your budgets too, right? I mean, having a recurring expense or emergencies. What kind of school budget do you have to deal with for the year? I mean, I also heard recently in last few months, a lot of incidents have happened, like
So I'm lucky in the sense that when there is an issue that would be considered maintenance or upkeep to the Lexington Public Schools, that our Department of Facilities bears the cost for fixing that, and not the school department. And I'm sure that they have set aside probably more money for the maintenance of Lexington High School than they have for probably any other of their facilities in town, because they know that the infrastructure is aging and have had to in a number of cases make major upgrades. And some of these things are both very expensive, and they're also, it's somewhat smarts to even pay the money, because you're paying the money to replace something that isn't really the kind of technology that you would want. So I was talking about those, steam boilers that heat the school during the winter, right? They require these giant condensing tanks to condense the steam back out as part of the heating loop, and we had to replace one of those. I think it was this last year or the year before, to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars, because it had eventually rotted through. And it does, there's something sort of that just philosophically smarts each time that we do that, when we're spending significant amounts of money to essentially replace in kind technology that we know is already antiquated and not good, both in terms of the performance it gives, or environmentally, and in terms of efficiency or anything like that. There's been a lot of ongoing maintenance issues at the Lexington Public Schools. Pipes that burst. Sometimes there's sprinkler pipes. Sometimes they're every type of pipe that you
yeah,
have has at some
it's
point
now giving up. Like
burst
it's a
or rotted through
70-year-old
in the last three
infrastructure,
three
and
or four years. And the
I,
problem the problem with them is you'll patch wherever it needed the repair, and
yeah.
then you're on borrowed time, that you're going to need it some other place, right? The water main to the science building burst 2 years ago. The steam pipe feeding the outer buildings from the science building burst last year. A sprinkler pipe burst in the science storage area, but thankfully we didn't lose all that much in terms of materials, but there was a flood. We've had a number of pinhole leaks in steam pipes that have set off fire alarms and have kept school from getting off the ground because unfortunately the smoke detector doesn't know the difference between steam and particulate and smoke, and so
Wow.
it sets the fire alarm off. And until we can get the fire department to come out and the electrician to come and reset the system, we can't get back in the building because it's not rendered safe. A gas line to the kitchen eroded this fall, and there was natural gas in the main building, and we needed to evacuate until it was cleared. So, when it doesn't affect the school day, it's a nuisance to facilities. And when it does affect the school day, it's a nuisance to me and the administration and the teachers and the students. And of course, that's when I'm grumpier about it because I want school to be happening.
So everyone is holding the falling sky, right? The
Yeah.
sky is falling. And you are just doing a band-aid approach. But definitely, I just heard that even if it's LHS is not paying directly for those operating expenses, right? But the LPS budgets are getting depleted, and a huge amount for running this steam boilers running must be getting depleted at the back end. And ultimately, those budgets must be coming from us, from the taxpayers, right? Those numbers,
It's all
because
one
you have to
bucket at
keep
the end of
running.
the day. So yeah.
Yes, that's right. So aren't there specific, because, in Education Institute, we have all kinds of students, right? So are there any group of students there who are most affected by the current building than others? Like, for example, with somebody with mobility challenges, sensory sensitivities, or some specific learning needs. Like, what does that look like, I mean, for them?
So absolutely, I mean, it's actually the ones you've mentioned are a pretty good example. We have one and only one elevator in each of the buildings to get to the second floor. That's a long way to go for somebody who has a mobility impairment. And then, of course, if that elevator is out of service, which it was this fall, at least for a couple of days, when there was a leak in the roof penetration and the water sensors in the elevator shaft were going off, that means that we are in an absolute pickle in terms of meeting that individual's mobility needs. So, yes, getting around this campus if you have a mobility disability is a huge challenge. The thresholds, the elevators, the all of that stuff. If you're a student with a hearing impairment, we have only a very few number of classrooms at Lexington High School that are properly treated acoustically in terms of sound, in order for a student to learn properly there. And with the FM systems that would tie into a student's hearing. And so that's a challenge because what that means is that we're really hand scheduling that student to those specific rooms and moving students and teachers around so that they can get to the room that they need to go to. And I mean, it's certainly true that the design in a new building assumes, and I think rightly so, and this is a good thing, that when you build a classroom, you universally design it to work for people who have hearing disabilities, people who have mobility disabilities, and that's built into every single classroom at the school so that a master scheduler doesn't have to worry. They just assign the student to any classroom in the building in any class that meets their scheduling needs. And that's a universal design. And the thing to keep in mind is that everybody benefits when you build and design that way, right? Because if you have those FM systems in every single classroom and you have those microphone systems and that the acoustic treatment, then even the students who don't have that disability are going to benefit as well from those systems. And so, yeah, I think that's a major way in which the current facility just can't. And then, of course, the other one is probably our heating and ventilation systems, right? Because to be clear, they call it HVAC. Right now, most of the school is just H&V, heating and ventilation. The vast majority of the school does not have air conditioning, but the learning spaces, at least in the proposed new school, are all air conditioned. It's very, very hard to learn when you're over hot and you're sweating. Um, and there's sort of an irony. I don't like it, but at the end of the year is when we often assess students' cumulative and summative understanding of how they're doing in a course. And so at the very time that we're trying to get a gauge on how a student did cumulatively over the course of the year, it's one of the worst learning environments for students to do that assessment
Mm.
in, right? And so that's unfortunate because not only is it unfortunate for that student, our teachers and our leaders take that data and we try to use it to figure out what do we need to do better this next year in terms of our teaching based on those assessments, right? Hey, it looks like students really struggled with the mean value theorem this year. What were you doing in your classes when you taught this? Do we want to do some, research over the summer or some professional development? And in many ways, we're getting the worst data out of students because it's the hot and the heat. So
So it's not fair for our students to be assessed when we don't give them an environment which they deserve. And I remember my daughter saying a few days back, "Oh, mom, I was giving this test and I was so cold that I had to put my hand on the heater because the conditions were not great enough for. I was anyway so nervous about my test, and over and top of it, these environmental conditions were further, bringing down the morality and the confidence in terms of attempting that what she was doing. So, in terms of if you think of the well-being, how do you see the building environment is affecting the stress levels and the same sense of belonging and of pride in their schools with everything going around like this? They're running around building to building, getting to be reach on time so that they are not being, so they are not asked to on their timing and so on, right? What is it?
yeah, I think that this is another place like when I said teachers do their best, to meet the needs and to be creative. I think the students do their best as well to take pride in our school and in our building. If you walk around the campus, you'll see more murals and displays about what makes Lexington High School than we've ever had in the past. And I love it. Some of them are beautiful. They speak to students, passions in science and the performing arts and literature. It's wonderful. And at the same time, is there a cumulative effect of, going to school in a place where, the window panes have failed and you can't see out because there's the mildew and the damp in between the panes and the sort of the things that are rusting and all of the fascia of the building sort of eroding away. Does that maybe have like a sort of psychological effect? I would think so, right? In other words, there's always a sort of, an easier sense to take pride in something that looks nice, right? And so I think we do a lot of work in trying to make our old school look nice, and speak to who we are. But I think that can have a cumulative effect, the crowdedness everywhere. Um, and there are other ways, the ceilings are so low. You go into our commons during lunch, there's a real claustrophobic feel to it. If you were a student who didn't like crowds and didn't like cramped spaces, that's gonna be hard on your wellness. There's not a lot of places where you could go to get a tiny bit of respite during the day or fresh air or sort of a feeling that you're away from it all. And so the only place that is right now, you'll hear students talk about it all the time, is when the weather is nice, they like to go out into the quad. But they don't have that from around, mid-November all the way through to March because we live in New England. And so one of the things that excites me when I look at the designs of the new school is that big open space that's the commons and the cafeteria and the learning stair as you first enter into the school, I have to imagine, because I've gone to some of the schools that have that, that there would be an effect of feeling like um, that there's a little bit openness, that you're not getting squeezed so much in those student spaces when you have and then you have the opportunity to go up to the second floor and they have different types of seating where you can eat with a smaller group of people in a cafe. That's all student wellness. There are some rooms that are devoted in the new building to student wellness where students can still be supervised, but do yoga or do thoughtful sort of meditation or other things like that. We just don't have spaces like that right now at Lexington High School where students feel that they can get a moment away from it. And we have students who take on very, very challenging course loads. And so what they do really want is, okay, they want to spend their lunch and their 20, 30 minutes sort of away from it. So
So that now let's we are at the end of our interview. So what's one thing about managing this building that you wish that every community member see or understand because it could change how they think about daily life at LHS? Like, what is that one message you would want to share with the community today? Because you're living everything. You're experiencing on every day basis this firefighting, the stress levels from the students and the teachers and everything. Like, what is that one
I
message?
yeah, I think that maybe my message would be that many times when caregivers reach out with concerns or when they're asking the school to change a policy or a practice around what we do, it's not always the case, but quite often the case is that there is a space impingement behind why we're doing what we're doing, right? Um, we have run out of new spaces to mine in the school to do what we really want to do. Um, and so I guess that would be the message, right? I'll give a really simple example because it's on the top of my mind right now. At the high school, we give many AP exams. We give many AP exams because there are many students who take AP exams at Lexington High School. I think we give more than any other high school in the state of Massachusetts, perhaps, or close to. We get requests to give more or to give them to students from outside Lexington High School or to give them to students who haven't reached a grade level at the high school. I wish what people could understand is that for those 3 weeks in May, it is absolute chaos around this school because we are trying to make space where there isn't, right? It's not a one for one. We're actually losing classrooms when we're trying to run those exams. And that's why we're so cramped. We don't have other places where we could sit students. That's why we have to have those policies in place because we've just run out of the space to do it here at Lexington High School in a way that makes sense. And there are many more examples as well. But the number of times where space is the issue um, is big. Um, and so just how hard it is to build a master schedule that meets all of those needs. Just how close we're playing it to the line in terms of the exact number of biology classes and the exact number of chemistry classes that we have to have and how difficult that is every year because a chem lab is different than a bio lab. And right now, those spaces at the school are specific to that subject. And in the new building, they're more flexible. So from year to year, we can have fewer bio and more chem or fewer chem and more bio, and it's okay. But right now, we're biting our fingernails every spring trying to figure out how do we get the students what they need based on the signups. And so space is an incredible limitation at Lexington High School right now. Um, and sometimes maybe we don't do a good enough job of just saying that and naming that as part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baker, for taking us around and live that life of what everybody's living today. I am sure it's very, very challenging environment to study and to teach in and to manage everything all along. So thank you so much. Kudos to everybody who's being a part and living this life today. I hope that our community can understand like what it is like today. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.